Hello all, Harmless Canadian here, and today I want to talk about PlayStation exclusives, PlayStation's shifting PC strategy, and more importantly, how the realities around those shine a light on a concerning trend in the way we talk about video games in our industry today. For today, we are skipping right over the Sony physical games firestorm, well, for now, to go back a few more days to an interview Shawn Layden did with PSI, formerly known as PlayStation Inside, at the end of June. Shawn Layden is a 30-plus years Sony veteran who spent over 20 of those years with PlayStation across various game production and publishing roles before eventually rising to role of CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment America and chairman of Worldwide Studios in 2014, before what appeared to be a rather abrupt and unceremonious exit in September of 2019. We now know a little more and that he elected to leave. But what's important is that not only is Shawn Layden a man who knows his stuff in the industry, but he presided over PlayStation during what is possibly not only the best run of first-party game production for PlayStation, but perhaps the best game production run of any publisher ever.
For the next hour, we hope to astound you with a
I
lineup
want to
of games
highlight all of
that are
that
both
because
dazzling
he has had
and
the chance to do some interviews after his exit from
Yes.
PlayStation, but he has become more active recently with several very informative interviews, along with a seeming increased willingness to engage in video game conversations across the board with blog-style commentary on Xbox, and even reaching out to Asha Sharma, Xbox's new CEO, directly regarding the challenges of her new role and the weaknesses of some of the product she inherited. I feel his views and comments have been highly insightful considering what he brings to the table. The interview with PSI is quite informative. I've linked it in the video here and in the comments, as it's well worth a watch or read, and I think it's quite possible I will return to it to look at some other questions. But today I want to dive deep on two questions he answered in the interview related to PlayStation's exclusives and PC strategy and its apparent rethinking of that strategy. This was, until a couple days ago, big PlayStation news, but I think Layden's insight is still well worth our time, and I think if we dive a little deeper, it highlights something I've noticed in the way we discuss things in our industry as well, but I'll get to that soon. The two questions I want to examine from the interview are as follows. Quote, let's talk a little bit about exclusives. Should we keep them? Should we get rid of them? We've seen Xbox trying to go on all platforms, and we've seen PlayStation toying with the idea with some games on PC, and even on the Nintendo Switch with LEGO Horizon, but never fully committing to it. How do you view the importance of exclusives in today's market? End quote. And the second question, quote, why do you think PlayStation is now backtracking about games on PC? They seem to feel it is devaluing their IPs. What is the right decision here, in your opinion? End quote. I want to look at the answers to those questions independently, then as a whole, and finally what those answers highlight about discussions in the industry more broadly. Layden's answer to the first exclusivity question is detailed and frankly filled with great information. Quote, I think exclusivity is very important to a platform business. That is how you differentiate yourself. If you want Zelda or Mario, you go to Nintendo. At PlayStation, we did exclusivity through the PS1, the PS2, and the PS3. That was the standard of the day. It became how we sold the platform. There's been a lot of misunderstanding about my decision to put a game on PC when I was at the helm. Moving into PC or multi-platform really comes down to two things. In regards to PC, it wasn't at the time and in my mind a way to make money, frankly. I see it as a way to get my intellectual property in front of people who don't normally see it. How do I get the world of Horizon to people who are not in the PlayStation world? It was not necessarily made to get people to buy a PlayStation. I wasn't that crazy, and I didn't think that was going to happen. But as we took our intellectual properties across other media, whether it was into films or television, comic books, or into merchandising, you needed to have as many eyeballs as possible that were aware of our character and stories. Just concentrating on the PlayStation population by telling these stories only to them, and then trying to bring it off that platform into different media, it was going to be a hell of a job. So why don't I find a way to get the Horizon or God of War world known by other people? That was simply what I was trying to do, not trying to make money off of other platforms per se. And looking at other titles, well, If you have a massively multiplayer online game or a live service game or a free-to-play game, then you have to be multi-platform because the economics don't work otherwise. It is all about, as we say in the business, the size of the funnel. If you get 3% of your players to spend money on the game, then you've made money. But it has to be 3% of 50 million people, not 3% of 5 million people. End quote. For me, there are three immediate things that stand out. The first is that he is quite straightforward in his answers about exclusives. Even in 2026, exclusives are important. Exclusive content is important for a platform to maintain value for the consumer and to differentiate from other platforms. To be clear, that means that even today, exclusives are a competitive advantage. I find this refreshing because there's been a sense, maybe even before Microsoft took their games multi-platform, that the old strategies were out of date, that pushing a platform forward through console sales was no longer valuable. More recently, the idea of locking games away from other platforms through exclusivity was anti-consumer, provided no real benefit, and most recently, didn't even make sense financially. This all seemed to come from Xbox shifting strategies over the last decade, and while each decision appeared to be consumer first, also reflected a reality that they couldn't compete doing the same old, so trying something new was their only choice. Some saw these changes as incredibly positive, but to me they always felt a little half-baked, and were more about knowing that they had to zig, no matter what direction that took them, when their opponent zagged, than a fundamental belief in the decision or the direction it took them. There are whole other videos to be done about the value of exclusives, but it was interesting to hear someone with his experience still championing exclusives, even as critics panned Asha Sharma's indication that a return to exclusives for Xbox was a possibility after years of going the opposite direction. Sentiment is divided, of course, but a large group feel that the idea of returning to exclusives is just lip service to a fan base and to give a positive twist on some messy PR. For me, the second thing that stood out was that Layden makes it perfectly clear that PlayStation's PC platform expansion was never about sales. It was never about the dollars and cents at the heart of it. It was more about eyes on products that had potential in the cross-media space, introducing IP to people who might or likely would never own a PlayStation, but would still be more likely to go see a movie, watch a TV show, or buy merch of various kinds if they were at least familiar with an IP. Again, I appreciate this take because while he doesn't agree with PlayStation backing off for the reason above, he also makes it clear that it's not about a numbers game. It's not about the financials. There was a lot of elementary analysis done when Sony was rumored to be shifting away from PC, and then officially doing so, indicating that it didn't make sense because they were making money. This at the very least would indicate that dollar sales was never their intention anyway, and so was likely not a huge part of the equation for taking the games off of PC platform, despite Shuhei Yoshida's recent comments that he also didn't think it made sense to leave the platform because the PC port additional income really did help cover the expensive development costs. Lastly, we get confirmation of something most of us have come to understand or at least believe, and that is that if you are making free-to-play games or live service games, which often rely on microtransactions or subscriptions to pay for ongoing costs rather than just the upfront sales, that more players is simply better, and you really cannot make it work at all financially with too small a player base. This one isn't so surprising, but it does highlight that even someone who believes in exclusives as a platform driver also accepts the realities of business and is not simply stuck in the past relying on experience that no longer remains relevant. To be fair, though, he was one of the first nearly a decade ago to really start trumpeting development costs as the biggest danger to the industry, so it was always unlikely he would maintain a position that entirely ignored that reality. Now, before bringing it all together, I want to move to his answer to the second question. Quote, well, first of all, the games don't go on PC for a year or more. It is not day and date. If they think that a game coming out 18 months after it is launched on another platform somehow stops the sale from happening 18 months ago, I would like to see how they prove that thesis. I don't happen to feel that is true. I think that if someone is waiting 18 months for a game to come on PC, then they were not going to buy a PlayStation anyway, and we did not lose a sale to them. If it is a way to reduce the cost of making a port, why not? I don't know what they are thinking. End quote. This part is key to me. Here he is validating the idea that devaluing is a thing worth thinking about for PlayStation. His belief is that at the current release schedule, or the previous release schedule I should say, devaluing is not really a concern. They probably aren't risking many sales today by putting on PC 18 months later. And the reality is that some of these games go on even later than that. It should be clear, though, that both he and Shuhei Yoshida, previous president of Sony Worldwide Studios, both believe that dropping PC didn't make sense from a financial perspective because it did provide extra income. To me, though, that indicates that there was another reason. The highlight here is that he accepts that devaluing could be a concern for PlayStation. He just doesn't believe that it is worth worrying about at the time frame of the PC releases previously. He highlights explicitly that it isn't a concern because it is not nearly the same situation as day-and-date releases, where devaluation could occur and PlayStation sales could be lost. Now let's get to the fun part. Layden ran PlayStation quite recently, and he did very successfully. He is a large part of the success of the PS4, and he is also a large part of the success of the PS5 through planning for it and preparing the foundation via the massive PS4 success. He is, however, giving answers that don't match most media expectations of the last 5 or 6 years. He unequivocally believes exclusives matter and drive the platform forward. That is, that they don't have to necessarily be money makers, just differentiators that drive consumer decision making. The current trend is to consider this anti-consumer, that it contributes to toxicity and really doesn't even make business sense. It often can feel like discussions of the business realities, though, are just secondary justifications for the growing dislike of exclusives because they feel negative. They feel like they exclude someone. And they parallel our expectations of concepts like gatekeeping, and the analysis ends there because it's messy or evokes strong emotions. Talking about PC exclusivity, he makes it clear that the dollars and cents or the basic balance sheet elements are not the reason he tried to put games on PC. He also indicates with his second answer that he considers devaluation of IP a thing, but at the rather belated release schedule, that is not a reason he would remove the games from PC. This is important because, again, the idea of keeping a game off of a platform because of a nebulous concept of devaluation has become toxic to many. For them, it reeks of a console warrior attitude and doesn't reflect any real business considerations, at least in the view of these critics. But Layden is clear that while he doesn't think it currently meets the threshold of devaluation or lost PS5 sales, it could be a real consideration if it was done day and date. All rolled up into this concept of devaluation is brand identity, and it again has become a toxic concept because some link it closely to console warriors, console wars, bad faith arguments, and people who may actually have more toxic hearts that these views expose. The reason I think this is all so important is because I understand fully the need or desire to avoid toxic concepts, to see toxicity everywhere, and to want to avoid engaging with any of it. I'm the harmless Canadian for a reason, but to me this line of thinking is also concerning. Being so worried about being toxic, with having ideas that limit players in any way, ideas that so easily work as ammunition for truly toxic people, or could be seen to align with their views, is not a good reason to avoid or dismiss them outright. We still need to engage with reality. Listening to people with that view would have you believing that console sales and platform differentiation through exclusives doesn't matter, despite it still clearly mattering and leading to significant revenue from non-exclusive content on the platform. Call of Duty is now owned by Xbox, and even was on Game Pass day and date for a year or so, but more players still played on PlayStation. The sales split is often as bad as 80-20 on other games, and many gamers, as well as PlayStation and even Rockstar, plan to treat GTA 6 as nearly a PlayStation exclusive, despite it being no such thing. Exclusives still matter.
So today, we're announcing that Gears of War E-Day will be an Xbox console exclusive.
And Layden's frank answers help us identify that the opposite view may have more to do with negative thoughts and impressions of the idea than critical thought. While not in this particular interview, Layden has on multiple occasions called into question Game Pass as a product and its sustainability. This view over the last decade has also been seen as a console warrior angle, and that the amazing value and consumer-friendly aspects were all that mattered. Deeper questions were needed, as the impact on the industry could be huge, and that is a separate video, but that is largely playing out to be true. The loss of 3,200 jobs is tragic, so I don't want to call on it without dedicated, thoughtful discourse, but Asha Sharma calls out Game Pass and the content strategy as the key failure in the need for a reset. A few years ago, the same admission coming from the CEO now would have been dismissed as uneducated console warrior opinions, or at the very least, unsubstantiated, so not worth discussing, as they could be seen as console war fodder. What Layden's answers illustrate is that sometimes the reality of the video game industry can be hard to accept, and sometimes the right thing in the industry doesn't feel like the right thing. I don't aim this only at some sort of concept of mainstream media, as I think it's something we've seen quite a bit across the board. This desire to keep things positive in every sense and to avoid things that seem exclusionary or in line with views we consider toxic or negative. Sometimes, though, for the health of the discussion and the health of the industry, we need to wrestle with ideas that make us uncomfortable, ideas that make us want to disengage at the risk of being toxic or worse, being corrupted by it. I will leave you with this. I don't blame anyone for wanting to avoid these kinds of discussions, avoid toxicity. But if we are willing to ignore blatant truths to feel better or project our own ideal version of gaming over what actually exists, I think it's only harmful. It prevents us from understanding how things actually work, resulting in pushing the industry in directions that appear positive when they are not, and prevent us from fighting genuine toxicity that in fact does not have foundation in anything real or anything worth discussing. Let me know in the comments if you see what I see in video game discourse, and if Shawn Layden's comments or anything else contributed to that feeling. I would never want to promote toxicity, but I feel balance is incredibly important in seeing the truth and moving forward with genuine clarity. And so with that, I've been your harmless Canadian.